Eleanor Blake moved through the terminal as if she owned every step, but inside she felt the familiar weight settling into her chest. The morning sun cut through the glass walls, turning polished floors into golden mirrors. The soft rumble of luggage wheels and the distant clap of an intercom announcement set the stage for what should have been an ordinary flight. Instead, the tension hummed just beneath the surface, waiting for a single spark. At the priority check-in counter, Eleanor extended her digital boarding pass and said, "First class, Summit Flight 721. Sasha's tight smile slipped for a heartbeat, her eyes darting between Eleanor's navy cardigan and her unassuming canvas tote. "I'll just need your ID," Sasha said, voice that might have been polite if her eyes hadn't been so cold. Eleanor handed over her driver's license wordlessly and watched as Sasha scrolled with exaggerated care. No apology followed, no hint that anything had felt wrong. Just a clipped, "Enjoy your flight, Ms. Blake," delivered like a verdict. Inside the Summit Elite Lounge, the air was kept at a comfortable 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and soft jazz drifted from hidden speakers. Eleanor sank into a leather armchair where light pooled like liquid honey. She tapped her foot as a retired consultant in a tan sport coat sidled up, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "This section is for platinum executives," he whispered. His tone was gentle, but his message was sharp. Eleanor flipped her Summit card from her wallet, the platinum sheen catching the light. He muttered something under his breath and drifted away, leaving Eleanor with the ache of his judgment. She pressed the service button on her armrest, and when a waiter finally appeared, his posture was all apology and awkward haste. "Sparkling water, please," she said softly. He nodded and rushed off, as if he might break if she looked too closely. Moments later, he returned with a plastic cup fizzing with bubbles. She watched him deliver crystal flutes to another table before remembering that she could have asked for the glass. She let the cold drink soothe her throat, each bubble a promise of patience earning its keep. At gate B7, she joined pre-boarding, her heart fluttering as the attendant barely glanced at her pass before the scanner beeped. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Blake," he said without inflection. No second look, no hesitation. But Eleanor knew better than to mistake silence for acceptance. She stepped onto the jet bridge, feeling the aircraft's low hum resonate through her bones, a warning of the storm yet to come. On board, a tall flight attendant asked, "Is that your personal item?" His voice was neutral, but Eleanor felt the question land like a challenge. "Yes," she said. "It fits the 9-inch by 14-inch size limit." He nodded, and she passed him as if she were made of glass, visible, fragile, scrutinized. Seated in 2A, she settled against the window and adjusted the headrest with deliberate care. A middle-aged man in a tan blazer edged into row 2 and cleared his throat. "I'd prefer another seat," he said to the attendant. "Too much foot traffic here." He glanced back at Eleanor with a half-smile, like a dog sizing up its prey. Eleanor kept her eyes on her book, but inside her hands clenched. The attendant offered Economy Plus as if that might soothe the man's sense of entitlement. Eleanor lifted her eyes and said, "I paid for this seat. I will stay here." The man's jaw tightened as he slunk past, leaving the air colder than before. When the welcome drink trolley came by, everyone else received their champagne in crystal. Eleanor's sparkling water stayed in its plastic cup. She did not speak. Instead, she stared out at the endless concrete apron and thought of her father's old words, "You do not need to shout when you carry truth." She let that truth anchor her, even as the cabin filled with hushed whispers and sideways glances. A final attendant asked about her meal choice. Eleanor reminded her of the vegan request she had confirmed 3 weeks ago. The attendant flipped through a tablet and frowned. "I don't see it here," she said. Eleanor retrieved the email on her phone and showed it to her. The attendant's shoulders sagged and she mumbled an apology as she scribbled a note. Eleanor tucked her phone away and closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the thin cabin air. The engines began their low rumble as the door chimed closed and the pilots prepared for taxi. Eleanor felt a surge of something harden within her. She sat perfectly still, her face composed, even as her mind sharpened into focus. This was no longer about discomfort or polite society. This was about sending a message so clear that everyone on this plane and beyond would know the cost of assuming that a black woman did not belong, and Eleanor Blake did not intend to let them forget. Eleanor Blake's gaze stayed fixed on the smooth gray tarmac below, but her mind raced ahead, already bracing for the next slight. She had learned to expect these microaggressions, that glance that lingered too long, that hushed whisper behind a hand. The safety video blinked onto the screens in the armrests, but Eleanor had long since memorized every routine. She closed her eyes for just a heartbeat, inhaled deeply, and then reached into her tote for her matte black laptop, the silver Vanta Labs logo gleaming like a badge of honor. No sooner had she powered it on than a familiar shadow fell across her tray table. "Excuse me," Trevor said, his tone light but his eyes sharp. "Is that your laptop?" Eleanor looked up evenly. "Yes," she replied, "it's mine." He gestured vaguely toward the overhead bin. "We've had a report of a missing laptop of the same model. We just want to be sure nothing was grabbed by accident." Eleanor blinked in mild surprise. "You saw me board with it?" He lifted his hands in a mock surrender, just standard verification. She hesitated only a moment before tilting the screen so he could see her work. E. Blake 3.8b Infrastructure Proposal Q3 Draft, scrolled across a live Google Doc. Trevor's stare lingered long enough to sting, then he nodded and turned away without apology. Eleanor exhaled and saved her file, but the number 3.8b pulsed on the screen like a challenge. Around her, the cabin's artificial calm hummed with soft jazz and the clink of drink carts. Just as she began to type, a sudden jolt rocked her seat. A small boy, no more than 6 years old, came tumbling into her carry-on stored under the seat. His toy dinosaur dropped from his fist and skittered toward Eleanor's heels. "Ma'am, what is going on here?" his mother snapped as she stormed between the rows. She wore a high-end tracksuit and designer sunglasses that caught the light with every glare. "Did you trip my son?" Eleanor kept her voice measured. "He ran into my bag. I didn't move." The woman's lips curled. "Maybe you should pay attention, instead of typing away like you're running a business from a plane." Several passengers shifted uncomfortably. No one intervened. Trevor pretended not to notice, fussing with the beverage cart just out of earshot. The mother yanked her son's wrist and swept him away, muttering that some people just did not understand first-class etiquette. The abandoned dinosaur lay half-hidden beneath the seat. Eleanor nudged it gently toward the aisle, but no one came to reclaim it. 15 minutes later, the seatbelt sign blinked off and lunch service began. Eleanor reopened her laptop, but her flow had fractured. She flipped through emails until one marked Confessional Nova deal caught her eye. She closed the laptop once more and leaned back, folding her arms. Outside, the clouds drifted past in slow procession over the cities she had funded and built. Yet here she sat, treated as a problem to manage rather than a partner to respect. A young attendant paused at her row with a tablet. "You ordered the standard chicken entree, correct?" Eleanor looked up, her expression steady but firm. "No, I selected the vegan meal when I booked." The attendant, Camille, hesitated. "I'm sorry, it doesn't appear in our system. We can try to find something, but there's no guarantee." Eleanor felt the old surge of frustration. "Please do your best." Camille gave a small nod and walked off. A few minutes later, she returned with a plastic container half filled with lettuce, 2 slices of tomato, and a tiny cup of vinaigrette. No protein, no starch, no care. Then the seatbelt sign flickered on again, and the captain's calm voice warned of turbulence ahead. Moments later, a sharper jolt rattled the cabin, sending a half-sink champagne flute crashing to the floor. With a hiss, the oxygen masks dropped from their compartments. Trevor sprinted up the aisle, stopping first at row 1 to help an elderly passenger, then at row 3 for a woman struggling with her mask. When he reached Eleanor's row, he glanced down and passed right by. His omission struck louder than the landing gear. Eleanor secured her own mask with practiced ease. When the turbulence eased and the masks retracted, she pressed the call button. Camille arrived, flinching at the sight of Eleanor's steady stare. "Yes, ma'am?" Eleanor did not flinch. "Why was I skipped when the masks came down, while you helped other passengers who were already covered?" Trevor appeared moments later, his face tight. "You had your mask on, you were fine. I was prioritizing need." Eleanor's voice was calm as glass. "Apparently people who look like me don't qualify as needing help." The silence that followed bore down on the cabin like a storm. Before she could say more, a new figure emerged at the front. He wore a tailored gray vest over a black shirt, and his name tag read Jordan, Guest Relations Lead. He paused beside Trevor and whispered something before turning to Eleanor. "Ms. Blake," he said, his voice smooth as polished stone. "Do you have a moment to step aside for a quick check on your comfort?" Eleanor studied him, felt the weight of every slight and every silent permission. She shook her head slowly. "No, thank you," she replied. "I'd rather conclude this conversation here, in front of everyone." The cabin fell unnaturally still. Wealthy executives in their crisp linens sat frozen, caught between obligation and complicity. Eleanor looked each of them in the eye and spoke softly but firmly. "I will not accept another perfunctory apology. I want a formal investigation. I want to speak with every manager on this flight. I want this recorded and I want this shared." Her words rolled through the aisles, echoing against the overhead bins. She listed each slight: the laptop check, the tote inspection, the lounge consultant's doubt, the mother's lecture, the token vegan salad, the skipped oxygen mask. She didn't need to shout. Every head turned, the air thick with reckoning. Eleanor returned to her seat and tapped her phone to record. She would press charges, file complaints, and share her story until this airline understood the cost of erasing a black woman in plain sight. The lights overhead glowed brighter, not with comfort, but with the promise of exposure. Eleanor Blake closed her laptop, stood with grace, and prepared to claim the justice she had already earned. Eleanor Blake looked up when Jordan spoke, his voice smooth but edged with purpose. "Miss Blake, would you mind stepping into the forward lounge area? There's a minor detail we'd like to clarify regarding your passenger profile." She raised an eyebrow. "Clarify what?" she asked, her tone polite but firm. "Nothing urgent," he added quickly. "Just a discrepancy on file. We'd like to resolve it in person." "It's more of a technicality than anything." His words were practiced, his tone polished, but Eleanor felt the intent behind them as clearly as if it had been spoken in shouts. She didn't argue. She closed her laptop, the Vanta Labs logo gleaming once more as she slipped it into her tote. With her spine straight and her gaze locked on Jordan's, she nodded. "Lead the way," she said. As she rose, the hushed relief around her was almost deafening. First-class passengers shifted in their seats, swapping looks of relief with one another. They saw the problem being taken away and felt safe again. No one asked what was happening, no one questioned it. They were just glad the anomaly was being quietly removed. Jordan guided her through the sliding curtain into a narrow passage behind the galley. The air smelled of recycled cabin air and lemon-scented wipes. Beyond another curtain lay a small room reserved for premium customer support. Fluorescent lights cast a harsh glow over beige walls. A single foldable desk sat against the far wall, and on the floor a thin carpet failed to mask the sound of footsteps. It felt sterile, like a temporary office set up in the belly of a ship. At the desk sat a woman in a crisp uniform, her name tag reading Operations. She tapped at a tablet without looking up. "Please, have a seat," she said in a tone that offered neither warmth nor apology. Eleanor sank into the folding chair, her heart tightening at the lack of any greeting. The woman swiped through a few screens and then looked up. "We've had a passenger express concern regarding identity verification," she said flatly. "Normally this would be handled digitally, but given the in-flight setting, we'd like to reconfirm a few details." Eleanor's chest tightened. She thought of every subtle stare she'd endured that morning and every assumption that lay hidden beneath forced politeness. She had followed every rule, answered every call button, and paid for the seat she occupied. Yet here she was again, her right to exist as a paying customer being questioned. "Which passengers concerned?" she asked, her voice calm but edged with steel. "That's confidential," the operations rep replied, tapping her screen. "However, to ensure smooth continuation of service, we're requesting a quick revalidation of your booking and a behavioral compliance acknowledgement." The phrase hung between them. Behavioral compliance. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "Behavioral compliance?" she echoed. The woman tapped the tablet and slid it toward her. On the screen was the Premium Courtesy Agreement, a document outlining expected conduct for all premium cabin passengers. It was part of an updated protocol introduced after certain mid-flight disturbances, the rep explained. Eleanor scanned the document. Every clause was dressed in neutral language, but she saw the edges of its intent. It assumed guilt, mandated compliance, and demanded an e-signature at the bottom. Her name was already pre-filled in the signature box. She leaned forward and pointed. "I haven't caused any disturbances," she said quietly but firmly. "I've followed every instruction, kept to myself, and addressed your staff with respect." The operations rep's eyes flicked away, her fingers hovering over the tablet. "Yes, ma'am, and that's reflected in our notes. This is just to formally confirm. We're all aligned moving forward." She gave Eleanor a tight nod as if she expected the nod in return. Eleanor's voice softened. "Has this form been shown to anyone else on this flight?" The woman's face went blank for a moment. "It's used as needed in cases where other passengers feel uncertain," she said, barely meeting Eleanor's gaze. Uncertain about what, Eleanor wondered. Uncertain about her right to sit in first class. A warmth rose in her cheeks, an anger tempered by years of controlling her reactions. She had weathered dismissive smiles in boardrooms and condescending comments in restaurants, but never had she felt so openly treated like a problem to be managed, rather than a person to be respected. Just then, Jordan stepped forward, his posture shifting from detached to politely concerned. "Ms. Blake," he said gently, "we're not accusing you of anything. We're simply responding to feedback and trying to make this experience comfortable for everyone involved." His words were carefully chosen, soft as velvet, but Eleanor heard the steel beneath. Her mouth twitched, not in a smile but in disbelief. She swallowed, keeping her voice low. "Comfortable," she repeated, letting the word hang in the air. "I paid for first-class comfort. I've done everything required, and yet you still ask me to validate my presence." A beat passed. Jordan opened his mouth, closed it, and then leaned in slightly. "Just sign at the bottom," he urged. He tapped the tablet lightly. Eleanor sat back, folding her hands in her lap. She did not look away. She did not lower her eyes. In that moment, she embodied every black woman who had been assumed unworthy of respect or dignity. She was calm, composed, and unbroken. The room felt small around her, but fierce with the weight of her conviction. The hum of the air conditioning and the soft thrum of the engines beyond the thin walls felt distant now. Eleanor wondered if the passengers behind her curtain had any idea what was happening. She wondered if they would ever feel the same relief they had moments ago. She felt their relief, like a bruise. Jordan cleared his throat, the tablet still in his hand. His carefully cultivated courtesy was fraying at the edges. Eleanor leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. She did not threaten, she did not shout. She asked simply, "What happens if I don't sign?" The corners of his mouth tightened. "Then, I'm afraid we'll need to relocate you to an alternative seating arrangement until we can finish verifying all details." Relocate her. Demote her to economy. The words barely needed to be spoken. She felt their weight settle over her like a winter chill. She thought of every mile she had flown, every decision she had made to invest in her future, every barrier she had broken. She would not be moved. She would not be made small. Jordan cleared his throat again. Eleanor rose from the folding chair, standing tall in the cramped space. "Lead the way," she said, her voice low but resonant. She would not sign their protocol. She would not validate their prejudice. The moment stretched, charged with the electric tension of systems about to break under her refusal. Jordan's voice softened even more. "Ms. Blake, we're going to let you return to your seat for now, but we do expect your cooperation should further issues arise." Eleanor did not blink. "Define issues," she shot back. He did not answer. He merely stepped aside, allowing her passage. She walked out, her shoulders squared, the weight of every prior insult and slight forging her resolve into something formidable. Back in the cabin, her seat 2A awaited. Passengers shifted uneasily as she returned, the air growing dense with the knowledge of what had just transpired. The tension did not dissipate. It reshaped itself into a new discomfort, slower but more deliberate. Eleanor Blake buckled her seatbelt and leaned her head against the window. She stared out at the pale sky and felt the calm after one storm gathering into another. She did not need to look around to know they were watching. She did not need to speak to know they were listening. In the hush of the cabin, Eleanor had already spoken louder than any apology could echo, and Jordan, standing just beyond her row, cleared his throat once more as he prepared to resume his role. But in that charged silence, Eleanor Blake had won her moment of reckoning. Eleanor Blake sat quietly in her seat, her laptop safely tucked away in her tote, and felt a shift ripple through the cabin air. Power had never interested her the way it fascinated others. She had always thought of influence as a means to an end, never an end in itself. But after what she had endured, power and real accountability seemed to pulse in her own hands. At the front of the cabin, Trevor approached again. This time his stride was hesitant. His earlier confidence dissolved, replaced by a reluctant humility. "Miss Blake," he said cautiously, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "The captain has asked if you would like a word." He glanced around, as if the very air might overhear and judge him. Eleanor looked him in the eye without a hint of anger or fear. Her expression was calm, yet every line of her face betrayed the exhaustion of being tested, but also the steel of someone who refused to break. "Tell your captain to focus on flying the plane," she said softly. "I've already weathered more turbulence than that cockpit could ever handle." Trevor hesitated, head dipping in reluctant compliance, and then slipped away without another word. A few rows back, the man who had demanded a seat change sat rigidly upright. He scrolled through his phone, his face paling each time he glanced toward Eleanor. He had been part of the chorus of silent witnesses, complicit in every slight. Now he couldn't pretend. Camille passed through the aisle, her steps more deliberate, her posture less guarded than before. She paused at Eleanor's row and gently set down a bottle of San Pellegrino with a crystal glass. "Compliments of the crew," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor nodded once, her gaze lingering on the bottle. She did not reach for it. "You don't have to fix what you didn't break," she said. Her tone was soft, but the words landed like stones. Camille's shoulders sagged slightly. "For what it's worth," she said, "I'm sorry." Eleanor offered a faint nod of acknowledgement and turned her attention back to the window. She did not crave pity, she craved accountability. Below, in Skylar Airlines corporate headquarters in Chicago, chaos reigned. CEO Brenda Holloway stormed into the crisis response room, where legal counsel, communications directors, and the chief financial officer had already assembled around a long conference table. The tension was palpable, slicing through the stale recycled air. "How did this happen?" Brenda demanded, voice echoing off the glass walls. She planted both hands flat on the polished surface, her manicured nails clicking against the wood. Malcolm Reyes, the CFO, looked up from the tablet glowing in front of him, his expression tight with regret. "We pulled one of our own top-tier investors from first-class mid-flight without realizing it was her," he said. She's the founder of Equitas Capital. She designed the entire $5.8 billion post-crisis funding structure. Brenda's face drained of color. "You mean she's the architect of our financing?" she whispered, tasting the words like poison. "Worse," Malcolm confirmed. "She just froze $900 million, effective immediately, for non-compliance with our DI benchmarks." Silence engulfed the room. The chief communications officer cleared her throat. "We need a preemptive statement," she said, "something that signals we're taking internal action without full admission. We can't let this spiral uncontrolled." Brenda sank into a chair, her eyes fixed on a blank spot on the wall. $3.8 billion hangs by a thread," she muttered. "We cut our own lifeline, and for what? Our reputation is falling." The legal counsel finished for her. Back aboard Flight 721, the engines hummed a steady drone as the captain announced their impending descent. Eleanor closed her eyes and drew a slow breath, savoring the calm clarity she now felt. It was not relief, it was resolution. They had underestimated her. They had assumed their silence and their soft exclusions would go unnoticed. Instead, every slight had built momentum toward this moment. Ridicule, token apologies, bureaucratic forms, they had all combined into a single, potent force. The first-class crew positioned themselves for departure protocol. Trevor, clipboard in hand, avoided eye contact. Camille, standing beside him, looked as though she might speak, then chose silence instead. Her slight head tilt said it all. "I see now what I failed to see before." Eleanor stood and stepped into the aisle, her stride unhurried, the glow from overhead lights tracing the curve of her figure. At the end of the jet bridge, two sharply dressed representatives in black suits waited, their lapel pins bearing the stylized E of Equitas Capital. One of them offered a tablet. "Ms. Blake, confirmation of protocol receipt for Tier 4 escalation," he said in a tone both professional and relieved. "Please sign here to finalize the transmission log." Eleanor took the stylus and signed swiftly, her signature looping with practiced confidence. The representative tapped the screen. "Are we live with DC and Zurich as of 5 minutes ago?" she asked without looking up. "Your message to Treasury Oversight and Nova trustees is already circulating," he replied. "Good," Eleanor said, slipping the tablet back into his hand. She turned and walked with them, each step measured but undeniably powerful. At baggage claim, a sleek black executive limousine idled with its door open. On the panel, engraved in silver beneath the company emblem, were the words, "Equitas Capital investing $5.8 billion for justice." A small crowd of media, corporate staff, and other executive travelers had gathered behind the private gate. News had traveled faster than any invitation. Eleanor Blake, sitting in the back seat of her limousine as it eased away from the terminal, did not smile. She closed her eyes for a moment and felt the weight of her phone resting against her thigh. A new message glowed on the screen. "Freeze confirmed. Legal brief filed. Coverage anticipated by end of day. Your conduct during Flight 721, specifically your repeated discriminatory behavior and failure to uphold respectful conduct standards toward a Tier 1 verified passenger, constitutes breach of Clause 2.1 of our contractual policy. Your employment is terminated effective immediately. Final compensation will be processed within 7 business days. You are not to report for duty or access company systems." Trevor sat in his modest apartment, reading the email again and again. His fingers trembled, not with disbelief, but with the sudden clarity that the pedestal he had built under himself, authority, superiority, was entirely disposable. Camille, spared immediate dismissal, received a written warning and was placed under formal review. Her manager called that evening to inform her she would need to attend a bias mitigation retraining program and be reevaluated during the upcoming quarterly audit. Skylar's board would be watching her every step. The fallout rose floor by floor until it landed squarely on Brenda Holloway's shoulders. The Senate hearing's outcome was widely broadcast, Skylar's stock dipped further when the retraction statement from Equitas Capital hit the newswires. Brenda knew that her legacy would be forever marked by this incident. She would weather the storm, but she would never fully escape the reputation of having failed one of her most valued partners and allowed systemic bias to flourish. And Eleanor Blake, the woman who had been stripped of her dignity in mid-air, who had endured microaggressions and silent erasure with unflinching poise, found herself sitting in a second limousine, this one bound for her hotel. She watched the city lights flicker past tinted windows and let a quiet satisfaction settle over her. She had not sought vengeance in dramatic confrontation. She had wielded the tools at her disposal, her intelligence, her resources, and the very contracts they had drafted, to orchestrate a reckoning that would resonate far beyond a single flight. She closed her eyes and whispered a thank you to the countless women who had endured similar indignities. Their resilience had shaped her. Their struggles had forged this moment. She let that gratitude fill the space where anger might have resided. When the car pulled up to the hotel entrance, the driver opened the door. Eleanor rose, her silhouette framed against a cascade of streetlights. She paused and looked back at the road, the path she had traveled from anonymity to undeniable force. She stepped onto the sidewalk with purpose, ready for whatever came next. Because now she knew that true power did not lie in privilege or pretense. It lay in the quiet confidence to stand tall, to speak soft but clear, and to let the system fold itself around the truth. At 35,000 feet, she had reclaimed her dignity. On the ground, she had reclaimed the balance of power. And in that reclamation, she had sparked a change that could never be undone. Eleanor Blake watched the fallout spark like lightning. Horizon Lift Air, once a minor rival, now soared on nearly $1 billion of redirected capital. At Skylar's glass-walled headquarters, CFO Malcolm Reyes stared at his projections in stunned silence. As the full $900 million hit Horizon's account, he closed his files, letting the quiet confirm his worst fear. They'd emptied their safety net. In Seattle, Eleanor sat at a round table with Horizon's executives. "I'm not interested in revenge," she said. "I want systems that reward integrity, not protect harm." The CEO promised Eleanor a public board seat and influence over every diversity initiative. Behind her, the strategic realignment document glowed. Equitas Capital committing $3.8 billion to justice-driven growth. A week later, in Washington, D.C., she delivered the keynote at the International Conference on Aviation Ethics. Dressed in navy silk, she spoke of reimagining spaces built on exclusion, not naming names, but speaking truth. The room broke into genuine applause. In a side corridor, a former Skylar flight attendant named Elena Ruiz approached, apology trembling in her voice. "Thank you for showing me that silence is a choice," she said. Eleanor smiled, knowing transformation mattered more than punishment. That evening, at Horizon's gala unveiling a quarterly fund for equity and passenger dignity, Eleanor stood as honorary patron. When asked why she stayed involved, she replied, "You cross the broken bridge every day so others don't fall through it."